Beyond the CRETE. Atlantis Mystery. What is man? How is he different 100, 200, 1,000, 3,000 years ago? He labored, he wove nets and cast them into the sea. He went out to the sea and returned with a catch. He fought battles and celebrated victory, and when defending the land, he honored her as his own mother. And during his repose, he served the gods, made merry and danced, and delighted in women whom he deified. And what about women? 4,000 years ago, they had also glittered with adornments and were famous for their fancy attire. They had charmed men. The secrets of allurement were likewise in their power back then, a power which was whippy and all-penetrating as the snake, subservient to their charms. Or is it, nonetheless, the serpent? What was it that protected it? The power of the powerless sex. What was it that by one glance at maidens and matrons aroused awe in men and admiration of beauty? Or of their secret power? What kind of power? A life endowing. The mystery of birth. It is only she, woman, who is a mother, the land, motherland, goddess. It is on her, for her, and in her honor that tournaments, struggles, competitions were held, as well as Olympic Games, not to mention the customary familiar types of sport, running, fighting, boxing, and the unusually deadly game of man with the bull. All of them have come out of this earth. Also, the gestures of initiation, the sign of the cross, the salutations of the Soviet pioneers, and the veneration of the mother. The very idea of the mother of land and the mother of God. But it's from here come the fashion, the priestesses of love, and the secret of seduction, and the stern antipode of female charms, militant feminism, and the dictates of the mother right come from here, from Mount Dicte. It's she, Rhea Dictina, who's at the root of dictates and dictatorships. The words of dictators and the oaths of leaders are impregnated with her. Mother, land, motherland. And what lies at the beginning of everything? A small island among three seas. An island which is a resort, an island which is a refectory, a temporary paradise for the reanimation of the weary European. Yes, with a glance from the sea that is in the middle of the terrain, this is how this land opens up, and to the one who has created it, such as it is, the land in the middle of the sea, to the one who looks from the sky, what will it turn out to be? A virgin rising towards the west out of the waters, or a horned mouton who stood up facing the east? A changeling of the gods, a beauty and a monster. Ariadne and the Minotaur. They, the children of Pasiphae and Minos, have inherited the secret of their divine forebears, Europe and Zeus. Just as this land, the source of the civilization of the West, lies in it, the inheritance and the mystery of the dwellers of Atlantis lie in it. Out of these two beginnings does the land of Crete spring, the warlike Olympian Zeus, and the sweet stranger girl Europa, who had given the continent her name. But what has happened with the island of the great mother Rhea? Why was it that the descendants of the newly come African princes became the rulers of Crete? The broad-faced, this is how Europe is translated, and also as wide-eyed, just like a round moon in the southern skies, a goddess, ancient like the land itself, laved by the Atlantic, Europa. But the cause of change does not lie in her. She is but the bride abducted by Zeus. Why and for what? We shall tell about this riddle of the island, but later, when we shall open up its earlier secret. The mystery of Zeus. Zeus. Who is he, the strange, wild-bearded figure, the male god of the Olympians, the almighty, the thunderer, a seducer, a rapist, an unfaithful spouse and a careless father of a whole tribe of heroes and nymphs? Or a sacred king condemned to death by the local priestesses of the great goddess? Even Homer himself calls the chief god of Hellas as CRETE, the one born in Crete. Moreover, the leader of the Olympic gods since immemorial times had not even been called Zeus. Zon is how he's remembered by the Cretans. He lived among the shepherds. He wandered through the mountains of Crete. He hid from his own father, Cronus. After all, he, the sixth child of the marriage of Rhea Earth with Cronus Saturn, had to undergo the fate of all his brothers and sisters, to die having just appeared in the world, to migrate from his mother's womb into his father's belly. And it was not because Cronus, the father of Zeus, was cruel or imprudent. Far from it. The prophecy and curse of his father Uranus, killed by him, that was what compelled him towards this frightening outrage. For it has been foretold to the father slayer that he too would perish from his own offspring. 5 children, and what children, have been devoured by Cronus. During her 6th pregnancy, the inconsolable mother ventured on a ruse. Having given birth to Zeus, she gave her husband to devour not her son, but a stone wrapped in his afterbirth. And Zeus himself she hid in a cave, the Dictaean cave, which is located in the mountains of eastern Crete. However, Cronus, terrified by the prophecy, felt something was amiss. He listened carefully, and not in vain. After all, the thunder roars even in his infancy. It was not for the youth's CRETE from the retinue of Rhea, he would have ended up as his father's supper. But they danced, rattling their swords and shields, daily and nightly. And they had saved little Zon from the god-devouring appetite of the father. The Dictaean cave, the Holy of Holies, the cradle of the new god. Here, according to legend, the boy Zon was born. Why in a cave? Is it only because it saves from trouble? Or is that all the young gods are her children, the children of the mother, moist Mother Earth, the one which gives birth to all living things, nourishes her progeny, and then feeds on them herself? Is it not she, the Dark Mother, that is the earliest form of brutal time, Cronus Saturn, devouring his children? The one who gives, loves, and fosters, she also takes away, returns to herself. The cave and the grave are 2 wombs. From one, people arise, into the other they descend. The insoluble mystery of existence. Out of here, from the womb of the earth, gods not only enter the world, it is here that people worship them. They dance and sing hymns. The chief ones, in honor of the sun, are dance on Mother Earth. Round dances are carried out around him, the hores around the Horus. They help the nights circle and the hours to pass. the Hores dance through the hours. But why is it that even now, in the age of nuclear chronometers, guards of the clocks still dance? Why? Maybe it's that time does not move by itself, and is it driven on, led on? For some people, straight on, from birth, the beginning, to death, the end, while for others, it goes in a circle, from birth to death, and from death towards a new birth. What kind of time was it for Zeus Zan? Not that eternal and carefree god of Olympus, but for the king god, the leader god, and the man god. At first, everything was simple as time passed. Zan grows up and turns into the lad Zeus, and he submits himself to the tutelage of the shepherds of central Crete. Here on the Aegean mountains, he is still hiding from Cronus in this cave. But onwards, stop. Now time for Zeus is not onwards. It no longer presents itself as an arrow leading from birth till death. Zeus's time closes itself in a circle. Having been born and brought up on Crete, Zeus Cretagenes dies on the island too. The king is divine, yet not immortal as God. The king, the husband of his wife, and the bull of the people, is destined to become the sacrifice with his flesh and blood to enter into the womb of Mother Earth, so that she would conceive and bear a young God in the body of a new king. And is that all that he is destined to be fodder, manure, the pleasure of the wife, to reign only because he is the husband, to bear submissively lust, self-will, female whims, and then to pass on the watch to the shiftman, and to wait obediently for the end on the scaffold or on the furrow? But what should one do? His rule without a divine wife is not accepted by the island dwellers, while the local priests of the goddess would not concede even an iota of power. Hence, he would need divine blood, but alien, not of local origin. Blood. It comprises the second mystery of the island. Because of it, the royal blood, in the land of the great Rhea, the divine royal coup had been plotted. The shift of female rule to the male. It sufficed only to find a proper bride, not here of course, but from beyond the sea, beyond the southern Libyan Sea. And so, instead of the captivating but bloodthirsty local priestesses of the goddess, Zeus, in the guise of a bull, brings a bride of Phoenician blood, Europa, a princess of an ancient royal lineage, on his own back, here, towards the southern coast of Crete. Now, as a result of his innovation, the island is endowed with a new dynasty, unfettered kings, unsubservient to their wives. This is how its beginning looks. The sovereign, freed from female tyranny, comes down onto the shore, snatches the bride, and rushes with her to the palace. But he does not deliver her as far. Passion overwhelms the thunder on the way. There's only enough patience until the Gorton, and here, under the shade of the plane tree, by the fresh spring, it happened. The mystery of the sacred marriage. They say Zeus was an absolute ego. This is how the great patriarchal revolution occurred. The island of women received a continuous line of men kings, and we received a beautiful tale about the bull and the abducted Europa. But still, what is it that had changed in the sacred marriage of the king and the queen? It seems that on the surface, everything is still the same as before. The same royal couple on the throne, the wife, the mother of lands, and the bull of her people, the husband and fellow siren, together with her. Yes, the abducted bride had remained the goddess, but she no longer had chosen her bridegroom. Since that time, the man took her according to his will, and now he is the self-willed one. Now his descendants will rule the island. 3 sons were born by Europa to Zeus: Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Sarpedon. With Minos' name, the legendary period of Crete's history will be called the Minoan. And what about Zeus? Zeus, as always, washes his hands and bifurcates. One leaves the dominion of the island, becomes the head of the Greek Olympus, and continues to subdue women's hearts, whereas the local god Zon, that king and leader who was born and raised on Crete, naturally dies. Here, among these rocks, on the sacred mountain, Euctus, as the island dwellers had called it, the local residents view the profile of their Zeus in it, and in the cubical clods of rocks, they view his grave, a temporary refuge, until the next birth or coming of a god or a man, a bull. That mystery and everything that is known about her are the myths of the northern conquerors, the Achaeans and Dorians. The written language of the ancient Cretans has not been deciphered, hence the beautiful of the palace frescoes of Knossos remain mute for us. Only the singing of birds, the splashing of dolphins, and the roar of leopards and bulls spread out over the ruins. Mute are the kings and servants, the priestesses and the warriors, the white ladies and the red lords. Who are they? What are they doing here? Are they diverting themselves, resting, or participating in a complex religious ceremony, a bloody rite? For 3.5 millennia, the stones are silent. The labyrinth, is it the palace itself, the twisting underground vault under it, or a symbol? Who had lived in it? The Minotaur, a bloodthirsty monster or a common bull brought for sacrifice to the moon? And on the whole, is this a royal residence? And what if Knossos is a huge temple, a religious complex with its entire household? A temple estate, a temple city, with supplies of oil, grain, and wine. In other words, an abode, a house of the double axe of Labrys. From the times of the first excavations by the British archaeologist Evans in the early 20th century, it still remains a mystery. Legend has it that the palace and the labyrinth have been built by Daedalus, an Athenian master in exile. The palace temple was splendidly equipped, the well-thought-out light shafts, the cypress columns and beams, sewers and even bathrooms. And seemingly, there is nothing sacred there. But at the same time, everything is sacred here. In a life not yet divided between God and Caesar, even a simple column could be rendered with incredible honor. Even its erecting carried a ritual character. But the main sanctuaries of Knossos were not the columns, but the horns of initiation. They're also a symbol of sacrifice, and maybe not only a symbol, but a tool, a scaffold for the doomed bull, an altar of the double axe. The main courtyard. Is it a cathedral square, a parliament, or an arena? A theater for fights, a stadium. Amid the ritual cries, the loud hooting of the crowd, the bull passed through this propylaeon adorned with the scene of the sacred ritual. In the courtyard, he was already waited for, at first by the participants of the dangerous game, the CRETE, and then by the labrys, the double axe of the priest. The challenge of the axe was the bull's last challenge. With a thrust of the labrys, the bull was brought to sacrifice to the goddess, killed. And before that, he was the one that killed, or he could kill. What did the Minoan youths and maidens wish to prove to themselves and to others by placing themselves under the horns of the fierce bull? Compulsion, a game, initiation, or the conditions of taking up high ranks in society, a leap from youth to uncertainty, through horned death to a new, adult, and significant life. Whosoever does not die will not rise to life, as Christ will say in subsequent times. For someone, it's a small death and a second birth. For someone, it's simply death, neither the small nor the large, the final, in the house of the double axe. What had struck Evans was how the palace walls were adorned with polychrome reliefs and frescoes, full of life and colors. One of them, the Prince of Lilies, became the emblem of Minoan Crete. The fresco was gathered from fragments in the belief that it's the king priest performing the solemn rite, a sower of invisible grace, but it's more likely to be a princess, the priestess of the white goddess, leading the bull towards the sacrifice. Arthur Evans was confused by the athletic shape of the maiden. Sure, there was something to be confused about. Such legs would not appear on the scene of history for a long time. White legs. However, white in Crete is the color of woman. The color is a symbol. The color is a mark. So after all, she is a princess. And what is truly amazing is that literally following Evans's discoveries that every type of female athletic feature which had disappeared for ages will, in just a few decades, burst into the 20th century, a century of sports and dictatorships. And the great archaeologist would be able, during the course of his lifetime, to see the new Amazons, the great-great-grandchildren of Europa. And likewise leaping, isn't it dangerous and breathtaking? Extremely. Where do they run? Why do they leap? Towards whom do they soar? What gods await for them beyond the crossbar or the finishing line? To whom are they dedicating their records, their victories, themselves? And from whom are they being sent wreaths, flowers, and for some strange reason, empty goblets? Whose honor are they defending in their competitions? And whose joy is reflected in the tears of those standing on the pedestal? Whom do the hymns praise in this glorious moment? Only now she is called not the Great Mother, but the Fatherland, the Mother Earth, interflowed with Father Heaven in an eternal embrace, but having remained her. For her are tournaments carried out and victories proclaimed. For her are salutes and hymns. But back then, 3,500 years ago, her children initiated themselves not by means of sandboxes or soft mats, but the wild, enraged bull. They aspired not towards rank or gold medals, but towards the highest caste of the Minoan society, towards the collegium of priestesses, not on the pedestal, but towards the throne of the great goddess. Here, towards the feet of the goddess, a crater was brought with the blood of the bull for the sake of performing the main rite, the washing of the loins of the people's mother with blood. The mystery of conception. The victim, its suffering and blood, had conceived the fruit of the future grace. Out of this brutal rite, the Hellenic myth was born about the dark passion of Pasiphae, Minos' spouse towards Poseidon's white bull. and the fruit of this passion, the terrible Minotaur, who was he, a mutant or an invention of the Greeks? On the one hand, the Minotaur is simply the bull of Minos, his substitute on the scaffold, while on the other hand, he's a strong priest wearing a mask of bull leading the ceremonies. He was particularly remembered by the messengers from Hellas, but chiefly the secret rite and the triumph of the Minoan Crete, their promise of a blessing for the children of the Great Mother, has entered the memory of the Achaeans, the sons of the father and the sword by its abomination and whoredom. So the Hellenists had wiped him off the table of history. They had destroyed the cult of the goddess and her bull, and had destroyed one more mystery of Crete, a mystery of the island of women. They are the most important main characters of Minoan art. No, the men had also remained in the stone, the bronze, and the paintings, but as servants, devotees, fishermen, and guards. A paradox. The culture, which had been called Minoan, had not left a single trace of the Minoses. On Crete, there are no lords on thrones. On the other hand, there's an abundance of ruling ladies. To them, gifts, vows, and oaths are given. They are given salutes. They are worshipped and beseeched. It seems that the revolution of Zeus, having axed the goddess's rights, somehow did not affect the magic culture of Crete. Or maybe it had perished. And what about the mysteries of the initiated? What will happen to the carriers of the divine will? The ties with the goddess will remain, but from an overt one, it will turn into a hidden one. And her priestesses and Maenads, obedient to their husbands during the daytime, with the arrival of the sacred night of the full moon, will turn into violent furies. The priestesses of the great goddess will depart into the depths of olive groves, and will wait for her condescension. In dances, invocations, ritual denudation, in shamans' ecstasy, transforming themselves into bees, doves, lionesses, and she'll appear to them, and just as previously, will dictate to them her will, the laws of the Great Mother. But not for everybody now, only for the chosen, those consecrated into the mystery of Ambrosius. And once more, we do not know how the Cretans called their ritual drink. Ambrosia is a Greek word which means immortal in translation. However, we can see the esteem and awe with which the dwellers of the island had related towards the drink itself and towards its source, the sacred tree, as if the goddess herself was concealed in it. Probably for this reason, the altar with the plant is surrounded by the most powerful symbols, horns of consecration, and double spirals, and the no less sacred labrises guard admittance to it. Far from being open to everybody, only to the initiated, the enthusiasts. That is how the possessed with God had been called in ancient times, or most likely with a goddess. On the famous ring of Minos, we can see her in three forms at once. She sails in a boat, sits by an altar, and hovers above her own throne, consecrating by means of herself three elements: water, earth, and air. And her bare priestesses, Maenads, pluck fruit from the sacred tree. It seems that this is all everything. But no. What is it at the pedestal of all the three sanctuaries? What lies there? Are they rocks? Tubers? They seem closest of all to depictions of crocus bulbs, not by their sizes, but by their importance in the lives of Cretans. The crocus is another sacred plant for the dwellers of the island. It's possible that the mixture, brew potion from its tubers, is what opened up the way towards the altar of the goddess. This road cannot be drawn on the map, just like the Minoan religion could not be termed as faith in our understanding. And likewise, we cannot describe the ancient Cretans as believers. Similarly to the contemporary adherents of Hinduism, they did not believe in stories about faraway gods. They felt their presence. They observed them, not in a faraway cosmos and the awe-inspiring natural phenomena, but in nature herself, and even closer, just close by, in themselves. Let us ask ourselves the question, why is it that the saffron, a variety of the crocus, as well as the lily, are such frequently encountered plants in the wall paintings of Minoan culture? Is it not for the same reason that the lotus is in the art of India and Egypt? After all, the lily, the crocus saffron, and the lotus pertain to one family. Maybe it's not merely because of the beauty of these truly splendid plants that they were depicted so often. Yes, the frescoes of the Cretans turn out to be unusual and unexpected gatherers of the orange color. This figure here, crawling amid the saffron field, was considered to be a depiction of an Atlantean. It turned out to be a monkey, but of a strange variety. The lotophages, as Homer would say. Homer, when telling of the lotophages, of course, had in mind not monkeys but people who lived across the sea from Peloponnesus. The lotus eaters, kind and hospitable beings. They fell in soon enough with lotus eaters who showed no will to do us harm, only offering the sweet lotus to our friends. But those who ate this honeyed plant, the lotus, never cared to report nor to return. They longed to stay forever, browsing on that native bloom, forgetful of their homeland. Perhaps the Lotophagia contains the clue to the strange manner of Aegean artists. 3,500 years ago, it had been totally different, the land of the Minoan Crete. The pastures, plentiful with grass, dense forests, and shady groves. The neighboring peoples had called Crete green and gross, and the location is very favorable, just between Africa, Asia, and Europe. Nothing, as it seemed, could disturb the sweet slumber of the island life. If at a distance of 700 stadiums to the north, under a broad mountain of the circular island, there would not be a mighty volcano slumbering, the one which had generated yet another mystery amid the three continents, the mystery of a fourth mainland. Atlantis, its name. It was called the Round Strong Isle and the Beautiful Callista. It had been the Thera until it had been called fancifully as Santorinos. Those who idolized Saint Irene in reality knocked against the nose, Santorinos, the sacred nose. Yet another jest on the part of the gods of Aegis, who had previously formed Crete in the shape of the monster maiden. However, not always had this island been a nose, more like a pig's snout, a round and splendid one with an elevated mountain in between, a mountain which turned out to be a volcano, fatal towards the entire Minoan civilization. First they bridged over the zones of sea and made a way to and from the royal palace which they built in the center island. This ancient palace was ornamented by successive generations, and they dug a canal which passed through zones of land from the island to the sea. The zones of earth were surrounded by walls made of stone of diverse colors, black and white and red, which they sometimes intermingled for the sake of ornament, and as they cored, they hollowed out beneath the edges of the zone's double docks, having roofs of rock. The outermost of the walls was coated with brass, the second with tin, and the third, which was the wall of the citadel, flashed with the red light of orichalcum, Plato, CRETE. Here, on the island of Santorini, everything is pervaded with a 1,000-year-old legend about the vanished Atlantis. But what is Atlantis? Is it a historical reality, a mythological one, an esoteric one? And maybe the mystery of the defunct continent is not at all a whim of fancy, but a natural inner push towards an ancient homeland, not confirmed on the atlas of the earth. Atlantis has nonetheless firmly established itself inside the inner cosmos of man. At the same time, the search for it in the ocean had become a synonym of fruitless fantasies. However, Plato's Atlantis, just as was the case earlier with Homer's Troy, had nonetheless been found in spite of all the skeptics. When the Greek archaeologist Marinatus had excavated the Minoan colony on Santorini, which had lain undisturbed for 35 centuries, the world gasped with astonishment. The 30-meter-thick layer of ashes and lava had safely preserved the ancient city of CRETE with its numerous priceless frescoes. What was gathered together from fragments on Crete turned out to be completely untouched here. The bright, luxuriant, refined civilization appeared into the world just as the beautiful Aphrodite, albeit not out of a sea form, but from the ashes of an ancient catastrophe. And the phoenix of hopes of discovering Atlantis has once again soared up into the clouds. Crete is too small to encompass it, the critics state, citing Plato. But Plato himself has discrepancies in regards to its size. In the division of the earth, Poseidon obtained as his portion the island of Atlantis. And there he begat children whose mother was a mortal. Towards the sea and in the center of the island there was a very fair and fertile plain. And near the center, about 50 stadia from the plain, there was a low mountain. In this fragment, Atlantis was seemingly copied from Crete. The plain of the Atlanteans is very similar to the valley of Knossos, let alone the moderately tall mountain in the middle. If following Solon's description, we would measure the island's size, we would see that its breadth comprises 38 kilometers, and this perfectly corresponds with the size of Crete. In another part of the text, Plato considerably expands the proportions, and the island transforms itself into a continent. But the country immediately about and surrounding the city was a level plain, itself surrounded by mountains which descended towards the sea. It was smooth and even, and of an oblong shape, extending in one direction 3,000 stadia. This part of the island looked towards the south and was sheltered from the north. Is it not too large for Crete? Yes, but it would suffice merely to change the scale of proportions, and the description of the mysterious land would correspond exactly to the island's southern valley of Messara. The figures of 1,000 and 100 are very similar in their language of the Cretans and the Egyptians. It would be quite easy for a copyist to confuse them, much easier than to find the traces of Atlantis under the ashes of 9,000 years. And so we approach Atlantis from the other side. Usually the traces of its existence are searched at 9 millennia prior to Solon, but maybe it might be worth to look for the traces of its departure, not 9 millennia, but 9 centuries before that point. The main point is that no matter where the land of the Atlanteans was situated, it perished in a horrifying natural cataclysm. Why would we not at first find a corresponding catastrophe? And then, from it we could draw a line into the past, to the flourishing of the land of Poseidon, especially since one such catastrophe is well known. It was precisely the one that destroyed Santorinos. Its obviousness and its proportions could be seen in the very form of the island. After all, what the contemporary tourist sees in the place of Santorinos are merely fragments. The central portion of the island has simply disappeared, except that it did not sink into the deep waters as the mythical Atlantis, but scattered in ashes along the entire oikumena. And the generally accepted date of the catastrophe, the middle of the 15th century BC, stands exactly 9 centuries ahead of Solon, 1450 years before Christ. These are not some misty Stone Age times. At that time, the island had been surrounded by developed civilizations of Asia Minor, Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia. Could a cataclysm of those proportions have been left unnoticed? So, we have the island of Strongil, or Calliste. At that time, it was still round and had a mountain in the middle of it, a steaming mountain, a volcano. On its slopes, there were terraces, palaces, and temples, springs of hot and cold water. And then this whole giant mass bursts into the air, 200 billion tons. A volcano, similarly to long-range artillery, ejects ashes, magma, and smoke, not even into the atmosphere, but out into the open space at a height of 100 kilometers. The rumble from the explosion is heard for thousands of miles. But then the gunpowder runs out, the volcano fires one last shot, and into the formed chasm, onto the burning lava, hundreds of millions of tons of water fall. Another explosion happens, this time a mushroom of overheated water steam, dozens of times more intense than of the most powerful hydrogen bomb. And this whole dazzling and deafening spectacle is accompanied with earthquakes and overwhelming tsunamis. Devastating waves dash themselves on Crete. A gust of water rushes along the island's plains, sweeping away everything on its way, followed by one another, and yet another one. The fertile layer of the soil is washed away. The cattle drown in the whirlpool. The flood demolishes houses and destroys the palace of Knossos. It's better not even to imagine what is going on at the source of the trouble itself at that time. If hell does exist, it's there. Only periphery remains of the island after the eruption. The steep cliffs of red and black lava remain today's mute witnesses of the bygone catastrophe, and on the spot where in all probability Poseidon's temple stood, a reminder to the present-day inhabitants of the island, there is a baby volcano in the center of the caldera, a small one, yet an active one, a rudimentary organ of fear, an atavism of ancient anxiety. And it happened that the river turned into blood, and all the waters that were in the river were turned into blood. This biblical line does not only recount the mystery of an Egyptian misfortune. Quite likely, it also contains a clue to the Aegean tragedy. And there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. And the fish died out in the river, and the river became putrid, and the Egyptians could not drink the water from the river. Recorded on an Egyptian papyrus. Smote every herb in the field, and brake every tree of the field. The biblical author enumerates the disasters, and here yet is another one of the plagues from the book of Exodus. And Moses stretched his hand towards heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. Are these fantasies of the authors of the book, or a distorted truth about real events? Most likely the truth. And the blood throughout the whole Egyptian land, and the putrid water of the Nile? Yes, the flesh and blood of the eruption are the red ashes and sulfur. They are the ones that plagued Egypt. What about the darkness and the thunderstorms with hail? Indeed, the darkness, the thunderstorms with hail, the locusts, and the beast gone mad, These are all legitimate heirs of a volcano eruption. The eruption of the CRETE volcano in 1883 was heard for 4,000 kilometers away. But how powerful must have been the noise from the Etherian eruption, a much more intense one. Isn't that the voice with which the gods speak, especially during the time of the Exodus? We should ponder upon that. If the mishaps of Egypt, which lies at a distance of 1,000 kilometers from the volcano, are called the plagues, how should we term the misfortunes which befell the Minoan civilization, the home of the erupted volcano? A catastrophe? A real one indeed. However, in the middle of the 15th century before Christ, this blessed island was overcome with more than just a catastrophe. It was destruction of a land amid the sea. Atlantis? Quite possible. But the last mystery of the island is not limited to the mystery of the Atlantines. Its last mystery is the mystery of the end. Why did the Minoan civilization perish? After all, there had been earthquakes and fires had happened, and palaces were destroyed to the foundation. But the Cretans, eager for living, had erected anew, even more grandiose constructions on the ruins of the fallen ones, and new fleets had swept through the seas, and bulls were hunted for palace ceremonies, and frescoes were ornamented with blossoming nature. Why was it that particularly this time something has broken down in the collective soul of the island dwellers? Yes, there had been earthquakes and fires, black ashes and red sulfur. Yes, there had been floods and perishing of fleets. Yes, there had been the warlike Achaeans who had finally subdued the seas and the land of Crete. But still, they had not subdued the soul of the Cretans. It had still remained in possession of their mother, the Great Mother. However, something has disappeared after the catastrophe. The gracefulness, the refinement, and the lightness of the Minoan worship. And something else has appeared, a sense of heaviness, fullness, a somber conventionality of the early matriarchate, and something else, something viscid, sticky, and sweet. It whispered, "Everything will pass. Do not stir. Do not drive away sweet slumber. Do not waste energy on outward illusions. Send them on inward ones, more pliant and obedient ones, obedient to you. And remember, the entrance into this new world is not connected with vomiting and convulsions. It is smooth and pleasant, because it is an opium. Here it is, the strongest ally of the aggressor, more forceful than volcanoes, tsunamis, and earthquakes. The creator of friends out of any material at hand. The flower of Morpheus and Persephone, of the god and goddess of sleep, of sweet sleep and of eternal sleep. The sleep of the will and of reason. It holds the clue of the mystery of the end. Here ends the great history of the people amid the seas, and simply history begins. The history of the island of Crete. Through its sacred lands, Dorians and Romans will pass, Venetians and Turks, Crusaders and Templars, Nazis and tourists. What kind of sacrifices will they render to the ancient gods, and what kind will they demand for themselves? Some of them will leave behind them cities and temples, theaters and bathhouses. Others will leave fortresses and births. Still others will leave behind minarets and markets. The brave will leave graves behind. The violent, after sowing suffering, will reap rebellion and death. As for the last of these, what will the tourists, followers of Taurus, leave behind on the island? We, ourselves.